93. I want to start with a personal note, or you'll hear it in my voice. I am sad today. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I lost a very dear friend on Monday night. We didn't know about it until yesterday afternoon when I talked to Steve. But Monica was just a dear, dear friend. Sang at our daughter's wedding. Betsy has known her from 1970. Steve and Monica have been our friends since 1989. First people to greet us when we moved to California. And I mean, just an angel. She's an angel, a glorious angel of joy. And she died very young, and Steve is, of course, crushed, and his children are sad and grieving, as all their friends are. We talked to each other yesterday. It's a very great and real burden of grief that families and friends carry. And I sent it to Steve yesterday. I always begin by telling people when I'm talking to them about the loss of a loved one, and it's particularly hard when it's somebody you know so well and love so much. D.L. Moody, great American evangelist, quote, "Someday you will read in the papers that D.L. Moody of East Northfield is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. At that moment I shall be more alive than I am now. I shall have gone up higher, that is all, out of this old clay tenement, into a house that is immortal, a body that death cannot touch, that sin cannot taint, a body fashioned like unto his glorious body." Now, what's not true about that is that is all. Because, of course, that is all for the person who has gone to heaven. It is not true of the people who haven't. And it's very hard. And I try and remember every day that I do this show that there are many, many thousands among the many, many hundreds of thousands of you listening at any moment who are carrying a burden of grief, whether it is actual grief of your own because you're addicted to something, or you have lost a job, or you didn't get a promotion, or because your children are screwed up. I always say you're only as happy as your least happy child, or the worst of all, you've lost a child, or you've just lost a spouse. Some of you are doing that, and I try to walk with, or trundle, with an eye on people coming towards me, and keep in mind, they may be bearing loads you have no idea about. Now, the serendipitous thing for me is before I got my text from Steve, and by the way, I think that is a wonderful way to let friends, close friends, know that somebody's died, is a short text, because the grieving party, the person's closest to them, really do not need to hear the same conversation again and again. And if you call someone, it should never be longer than 3 or 4 minutes. I called up my buddy Botkin because he lost his wife, Sharon, last year. And like Steve, the big thing for men never expect to die first. They just don't. If you've been married 20, 40, 50 years, you just do not expect to die first. And it just is a knockout punch. And kids don't expect moms in their early 60s to die, and the grandchildren don't expect it, and it's just a shock. My friend Jan Gennaro released a podcast yesterday, which he does weekly, about dealing with loss, which I had listened to. I always listen to Jan's podcast. He runs the Wild Adventure, twi.us, and he has the new book out on turning small talk into big talk. Well, he just happened to have recorded this on Tuesday. I listened to it Tuesday after the show, and then an hour later, I got a text from Steve about Monday night and Monica dying, and I just said, wow, there's just no way to prepare. But when you meet people, you just always have to be aware. I tell my law students this: you never know when the judge on the bench, wife, is just gone through surgery and it didn't go well. You never know when the prosecutor that you're up against, husband, has been diagnosed with ALS. You just never know. My friend Dennis Prager makes this point again and again and again. You conduct yourselves towards everyone with grace and graciousness, because you just have no idea what is going on in their life. You have no idea if the boss screamed at him at work. You have the person who cuts off or is honking on you and leaning on the horn. You always got to think something's wrong with that person's world and give them grace and graciousness. But, the world keeps turning. We have work to do that is particularly true of Christians, and we have grief to express. But I want you to know that when I begin a broadcast, it may not be as upbeat or happy as I normally am. I did already lay down the long universe grand old pod today because the Judiciary Committee yesterday had a hearing that just should not be missed, and I want you to hear most of it. So even though I will play some of that in segment 3, I will now run through the headlines. But I want you to know that if there's a little hitch in my step today, it's because when you lose a friend as extraordinarily special as Monica, and I just can't tell you how wonderful this woman was. She just, you needed anything, she did it. And her kids are such wonderful girls, and her son-in-laws are such wonderful son-in-laws, and her grandchildren are such, and Steve is just rock solid Steve, that everyone that knows them grieves today. News. The monster who killed the neighbors in Texas was captured overnight. And I'm glad that a monster is off and people don't have to worry about him anymore. As the sheriff arresting said, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. And hopefully he expresses and feels sincere condolences and gets right with the Lord, because that's just evil personified. Yesterday was a rough day on the markets. I'm going to do the market update now because it's the big story. The market updates are always brought to you by Birch Gold. Go to hughgold.com, text my name, Hugh, to 989898. They'll help set up your IRA, your SEP IRA, your 401k using physical precious metals. And after yesterday, some of you might be saying, I wish I had gold. The Dow was down 367, 1%. The S&P was down 48, 1%. The NASDAQ down 132, down 1%. I do not know why Amazon went up a 1.5%, except I think tech is back as sort of the reserve currency of America. If you don't buy gold, and you don't buy real estate, you buy big tech because they're so big and they have big moats and tall walls, and so people, maybe that's why. But it's shaky.
And Windows will appear on
Shares
your
of a number of mid-sized lenders report the Wall Street Journal fell sharply Tuesday, following the collapse of First Republic Bank. Banks that took a hit following the March collapse of Silicon Valley Bank fell the most.
First of all,
Los Angeles-based PacWest dropped 28%. Phoenix Western Alliance fell 15%. Metropolitan Bank in New York declined 20%. A broader index of regional bank stocks fell more than 5%. You know what gold did? It went to $2,025 an ounce. That's why people call up Birch Gold. That's why they go to hughgold.com or text Hugh to 9898. Gold went up $29, $30 yesterday. The 10-year Treasury dropped at 3.4%. It hadn't been at 3.4% this year. So if you were thinking about buying a house, call up andrewandtodd.com today. Or 888-1172, and they didn't even pay for that. I'm just saying I haven't seen 3.4 in a long time. So bad day. Hopefully the market stabilizes today. There are many stories about this and how it's spread. Then job openings neared a 2-year low. So there aren't jobs out there for people anymore. Meanwhile, the debt talk, I'm going to talk with Chris Christie about this later today. Mitch McConnell said Tuesday he will attend the May 9 meeting at the White House with President Biden and Senator Schumer, Speaker McCarthy, and Leader Jeffers. But the Senate Minority Leader, McConnell, made clear that's where his role ends. Quote, there is no solution in the Senate, McConnell told reporters. The Senate is not a relevant player at this time. You know what's most worrisome? The Biden White House yesterday raised a trial balloon. Is the debt limit constitutional? Biden aides are debating it. What morons, really? Do not go out there and crater the markets like this. Do not, maybe we'll just ignore the debt limit. You cannot ignore the debt limit. You can't. The president also ordered 1,500 people to the Mexican border, 1,500 troops. Well, that's good. It's about 2.5 years too late. He must be looking at polling and re-election numbers, and somebody told him to do this. I don't think the president is capable of being president. I say that every day. He's infirm. I pray for him every morning, along with my family and my friends, but I pray for the president and his health. He's just infirm, and he can't deal with all these things. Meanwhile, a huge story Matt Pottinger sent me. A Canadian intelligence report suggests Beijing meddled in the 2019 and 2021 campaigns in Canada. I'm telling you, the CCP is the threat. They are the evil in the world. It is growing every day. You've got to be aware of it. And I'll be back with more news. There's my Twitter account. You've already read this. It's in this morning's news items. It's the only Substack to which I subscribe. News items by John Ellis. And this is a shocker. The world's major military powers have begun a race to wire artificial intelligence into warfare. For the moment, that mostly means giving algorithms control over individual weapons or drone swarms. No one is inviting AI to formulate grand strategy or join a meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But the same seductive logic that accelerated the nuclear arms race could, over a period of years, propel AI up the chain of command. How fast depends, in part, on how fast the technology advances, and it appears to be advancing quickly. How far depends on our foresight as humans and on our ability to act with collective restraint. This is a summary of an article in The Atlantic, or an editorial from The Atlantic, or a piece from The Atlantic. And my response was on Twitter, this reminds me of the late, great Charles Krautheimer's thesis that we've not heard from other worlds simply because technology there eventually advances to self-destruction before it advances to communication with other planets. In other words, civilizations advance and they blow themselves up. And one of the commenters on that, of course, immediately went to the Terminator and drones. And then another one did a famous quote, "Strange game. The only way to win is not to play." That's from War Games in 1983. So 40 years ago, War Games. I may rewatch War Games. I think it's Matthew Broderick. Is that right? Is it Matthew Broderick? Yeah.
Matthew Broderick.
Yeah. And so I haven't watched it in 40 years, but it's basically no kill button, no fail-safe switch, and the world is hurtling towards nuclear war. AI. It's basically AI. So it's a prophetic. You thought Blade Runner was prophetic. If you mix up Blade Runner and War Games, you've got AI-controlled military. Whew. I do not know what my grandchildren are going to do. I really don't. You know, I sat down, told this story before, but you might be a new listener. In 2005, I owed a book to Regnery. So I thought, I'll write a book about this governor in Massachusetts, Mitt Romney. And I'd never met the guy. And so I knocked on enough doors, and I bugged him enough. They finally let me in. I went up to the State House, and I sat down with then Governor Romney, who has become a friend, and I helped him write his next book after I wrote my book, A Mormon in the White House, in 2006, and he ran for president in 2008, didn't get the nomination, ran for president in 2012, was nominated. I like Mitt Romney a lot. I keep my Mitt 12 license plate right behind me here on the set because I really like Mitt Romney a lot. He's a good man. And we don't always agree. And I wish I had written the speech that he accepted the nomination with. I think he would have won the presidency with a little bit better coaching, a little bit better preparation for debates and for speeches and things like that. But it didn't happen. Nevertheless, when I sat down with him for the first time, he looked at me. I was 50 at the time. He said, Are you a grandfather? I've got white hair since I was 35, so excuse. No, I'm not. He said, when you're a grandparent, your perspective on everything will change. And then he proceeded to tell me how. And he's right, because it just extends your vision into places where you just think 30, 40, 50 years out. I ain't going to be here. If I am, you're not going to be hearing from me. And even the late, great A.T., my beloved grandfather, made it to 101 on his own wheels in his own house. In Ashtabula, shoveling his own snow with the dog Bruno. He just got a new dog and replaced it with another one. He always called them Bruno. And so, even if I've got AT genes and just go like the snowman from Ashtabula, Smokey was his nickname. He was a fireman. Even if that happened, I don't think AI will take over the world by then in 25 years. That's longer than that. It's 35 years. I'm not good at math. Have you noticed? That's why I'm a lawyer. I did do AP calculus, et cetera, but I haven't touched a math book since 1974.
Well, spelling's not your strong suit either.
I never learned to spell. I learned early on that George Washington couldn't spell, and I told myself, well, that's it. I'm not going to learn to spell. But I do believe this AI is a marvel and a terror. I don't think nuclear weapons are a terror. People can imagine what they do, right? We've seen the clouds. I just saw that the guy who stars in Peaky Blinders is making a movie about Oppenheimer. And Tommy and Peaky Blinders, I don't know what his name is. And we all understand what nuclear war is. So in 1962, when the Cuban Missile Crisis was, I don't remember it, but some of you do, and you'll remember that was pretty scary. That was very scary, and we haven't come close since then. And the Chinese are completely nuts. The Chi-Coms, not the Chinese people, they're wonderful. The Chi-Coms are Leninist killers. And Xi just might, let's just take America out of the game. They won't launch. He could make that bet. He's a Leninist. He doesn't believe in anything. He could make that bet. So we got to go back to thinking like Herman Kahn thought, strategically. But this AI, I don't know. Meanwhile, we have a debt crisis. The late shows went dark, so there's some good news out there. Did anybody actually miss Jimmy Kimmel? Did anybody miss Colbert? Anybody at all? Yeah, everyone was watching Gutfeld. I don't know if Gutfeld went out. I don't know that he uses writers. I don't have any writers. I just think to myself, they're really that dependent on writers, or are they striking in solidarity? I mean, if you're Colbert, I know he can go out and do 10 minutes of stand-up to start a show. It might not be the funniest stand-up ever. It might not be 8 jokes in 10 minutes that are timed for the life. He can just go out and riff. You can get Dave Barry to fill in for all of them. Dave Barry is the funniest man on the planet, followed by Lilacs, and they should be guest hosts. They could let Lilacs go out and be a guest host, don't you think? Yeah. Since you're on, let's talk about myphdweightloss.com. I don't know why you're there. Why are you there? Now there's nothing. Now you're back.
I'm right here.
Yeah, but why are you there? Did you turn on the look at me button?
Yes, with my hands right here.
I can't see you now. You turned yourself off. You're like AI has taken over the studio.
Yes.
AI and Jacob.
Jacob.
Well, myphdweightloss.com is a sponsor of the show, and I don't use it. Dwayne did. And Dwayne lost 50 pounds in the fall, and he's kept it off all the way now to the
I still technically use it.
I know you do. You call in. Do you ever call in anymore? Do you even bother to call in?
Absolutely. A couple times a month, I talk to Rachel, my nutritionist.
What does she say? No potato chips?
You can have potato chips. Just
See, I hate that.
Often.
Don't encourage people to eat potato chips. That's bad.
It's bad, but you can do everything in moderation.
All right. They've obviously brainwashed him at myphdweightloss.com, but it works, right?
Well, okay, yes.
There's a third of you missing.
Well, not a third, but
864.
Fifth. 644.
1900.
That's 864.
644.
1900.
That was ahead of when I wanted to do it. Let me finish. I am going to do the entire Grand Old Pot. He can go away now, Jacob. Our AI and Jacob-powered studio. You can get rid of him. Thank you. There's a story, lawmakers grapple over whether the Supreme Court needs an ethics code. It has an ethics code. It's voluntary. It cannot be other than voluntary because that's the Constitution. You know, I printed off yesterday Article 3, Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish it. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and which at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. End of the qualifications clause. Guess what the court said in term limits? U.S. term limits v. Thornton. It was a 5-4 decision, and there were liberals on the court writing it, not conservatives. One may neither add nor subtract from the qualifications of office. The court may not have imposed upon it a compliance test because it's unconstitutional. All right? They cannot target the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court does have an ethics code. They adopted it in 1991, and they do occasionally make mistakes and leave things off, or they learn new things and they put things on and they amend their forms. And occasionally, funny stuff. I'll play one clip that I will include in the Grand Old Pod today on the podcast. I want to play Lindsey Graham, cut number 19, please.
In 1998, Justice Ginsburg donated a signed copy of her decision in VMI.
The beginning. That's not the beginning. Stop. Go back to the beginning. Stop. You got to go back to the beginning of cut number 19 because the beginning of it sets up. It's the MacGuffin is at the beginning. So can we replay cut 19?
In 1998.
Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it.
Yes, it is.
19. Then let's go back to cut number 18.
Does anybody know anything about the organization Demand Justice? Negative response for all members. Do you know where their money comes from? Negative response by all members. Are you aware that they spent over $1 million in ads pressuring Justice Breyer to resign? Nobody knew that.
No,
right?
we are not. All right?
So if you
We are not. Cut number 19.
In 1998, Justice Ginsburg donated a signed copy of her decision in VMI case where you had to admit women to a state school. And it was auctioned off at a fundraiser supporting the National Organization of Women's Legal Defense Fund. Now, I didn't know that until this moment. Do you all agree that if Judge Alito signed the Dobbs decision and gave it to the Susan B. Anthony pro-life organization to raise money, all hell would break loose in this country? Do you agree with that, Ms. Forrest?
Would I agree that if there was a sale of a
If
opinion as
Judge
a fundraiser?
Alito signed the Dobbs decision, autographs it, gave it to the SBA group to raise money, it'd be all hell would break loose.
Oh, yes, and I certainly would agree that would be a problem. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons that Congress needs to play an active role today.
Why didn't all hell break loose in 1998?
I'm
When
not sure what
Justice
the reaction was.
Well, when Justice Ginsburg
Yeah.
signed a copy of the VMI decision for the National Organization of Women's Legal Defense Fund. Well, I think we all
Nothing
know the
happened.
answer to that.
Nothing happened. This isn't about an ethics code. It's about attacking Clarence Thomas, who will not be for turning. He is a rock. He is solid. He will not resign. Try and impeach him, Democrats. Just go ahead. Have another high-tech lynching. He did nothing wrong. Neither did Neil Gorsuch. None of these people did. Neither did Justice Ginsburg, who was a fine American. I'll discuss it all in the grand old pod, and we'll find the right order of clips. But stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening on this Wednesday, May 3rd. Senator Marsha Blackburn is a great American. She's senator from Tennessee. She joins me. She's a member of the Judiciary Committee. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
I want to talk about the hearing yesterday, the attempt to smear the Supreme Court, but I begin with a factual question. I watched a lot of it, and I'm playing a lot of it in my grand old pod later today. But did at any point Chairman Durbin read not only the letter from the Chief Justice of April 25th, but the statement he attached on ethics, principles, and practices that is 2 pages and a quarter long and is signed by all 9 justices? Did the chairman read that into the record?
I think it, pardon me, I think it was a ranking member that read that into the record.
Because every question was asked and answered. They've had a code of ethics since 1991, voluntarily adopted. And I hate to tell the senators this, you don't have any authority to impose a code of ethics on the Supreme Court. They're a separate but equal branch of government.
Well, and that's the point that I made as I was questioning during that hearing yesterday, because we had General Mukasey in front of us, and of course he has served our country in times past, and we were talking about Section 1507, which is the federal statute that is being broken by these protesters who insist on continuing to protest outside of justices' homes. And it states very clearly that it is a federal crime to try to intimidate or influence a federal judge. And my legislation would stiffen that penalty from a year of jail time to 5 years of jail time, thereby ensuring us these people are going to serve time in jail. And he said, well, first of all, we need to get some of these people arrested, because right now that is not being enforced. If that were being enforced, people could not continue to try to intimidate the justices and their family, or dox them and reveal where children go to school, or where justices are when they are out and about. And this fear and intimidation tactic that the left is trying to push forward is just really quite incredible. And you look at the DOJ and how they are picking and choosing what laws they want to enforce and what they choose not to enforce. And it shows you that they're going to continue to favor leftists and they're going to disfavor conservatives.
Now, the section that you reference applies to federal law enforcement. I have asked both Governor Youngkin and former Governor Hogan why arrests were not made. It's a federal statute. It's up to the Department of Justice to protect. And it is a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. It is not unconstitutional. I did hear Judge and former Attorney General Mukasey make that statement. It's just a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction, and it is not being enforced. I want to go to the more broad principle, though, Senator. You've held confirmation hearings for Justice Jackson Brown. You've heard confirmation hearings for Judge Kavanaugh. They're good people. All of them are good people. The leftist, the most liberal member, the most conservative member, they're all good people. I think the left doesn't have a conscience about this. They are endangering the lives of these people.
And they continue to allow it to persist. And this business of saying, hair on fire, we have to do a hearing on ethics of the court. Oh, heavenly days, there's been a breach, blah, 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 blah. You know what? That is up to the Chief Justice to attend to. Where we do have the ability to take an action is on the protection, the enforcement of the federal statutes that allow for the protection of the court. But having a hearing and trying to blame justices, and of course, this is all about delegitimizing and politicizing the court so that they can go about packing the court and making the court subservient to the will of Congress. And it is a co-equal and separate branch of government.
And therefore cannot be regulated with a court-specific statute. The statement from the court says they must abide by the 12% limit on outside income. And I don't agree with that analysis, but they're the justices. So if a general law of general applicability, they can't go knock over a liquor store, right, and say I'm a Supreme Court justice. They go to jail, generally applicable law. But the Congress may not target the court. I mean, all they can do is impeach. The House has not impeached anyone, no articles of impeachment. And the idea that Clarence Thomas took a trip or 20 trips or 100 trips with a rich friend, it's laughable, Senator, given the way that every member of Congress from both parties, when they reach leadership, treats and travels. It is laughable that the Supreme Court is being attacked this way.
But there again, what they're trying to do is delegitimize the court. And they've been after Clarence Thomas since day one. He is a conservative. He is a student of the law, and they cannot stand it. And so they have been on his case. They take every opportunity to be on his case. He is not supposed to be a conservative. He doesn't carry forward like they think he should carry forward. And they don't agree with the decisions the court has made. So they're using this. They look for anything that they can do to delegitimize the court. They do it to delegitimize conservatives. I mean, we deal with things every day because I am a female and I am a conservative, and thereby I do not meet what they think a female in the U.S. Senate should have as her guiding principles. So we get hit every single day. And the left wants you to be submissive to what they think women should think, what they think minorities should think.
Now, Senator, it's my experience that out of the spotlight, all the senators get along. I mean, it's my experience that Democrats and Republicans get along. And in fact, all of you are concerned for example, Senator Feinstein's health, that you all care about Dianne Feinstein. You're friends. And I don't know why the public face of the left is intent on making people believe that every institution is paralyzed by acrimony and hatred. It's not true.
And I worked this week, Senator Blumenthal and I have introduced the Kids Online Safety Act. And it's a reintroduced bill from last Congress. And Hugh, we have 32 original co-sponsors on that bill that are bipartisan. And we have Republicans and Democrats on that bill. And I think that's an important step. And people have said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is."
What does it do? I don't know about the bill. What's it do?
Yeah, and we do it because we agree that children need to be protected in the virtual space, and big tech isn't doing it. So
how's it work?
And I said, "Yeah." We said, "Let's get this done." So
but how does the bill work, Senator? I'm unaware of it.
Oh, yes. The Kids Online Safety Act is it's the first step in putting governance on social media. It would require a duty of care, and it would require these platforms to use safety by default in order to protect children and what they see and hear on some of these social media platforms. And what we have had, it's been like the Wild West, and there are no filters. There's no way for parents to restrain this cyberbullying and the exposure to things we would never allow children to be exposed to in the physical space. They're being exposed to in the virtual space.
Well, bravo for you and Senator Blumenthal. That's long overdue. Yeah. And there are a couple of ways to go about it. The .xxx or the .kids is a way, but a duty of care, that's an interesting concept, Senator. Any hearings on that coming up?
We had hearings last year when it was initially introduced, and we think passage of it will move very quickly. We have hundreds of organizations, whether they're religious organizations, pediatricians, child psychologists, teachers, principals, all sorts of organizations.
Boy, I wish the hearing yesterday had been about that, because that would actually help things as opposed to smear the court. Senator Blackburn, thank you for being there and putting up the defense yesterday. You're a great champion of fair play, and I appreciate it. America, it's Hugh Hewitt. Is it breaking news or is it a false flag? Jim Garrity joins me to give us the detail of what will be the biggest story today, but he already has the false flag warning music in the background. Good morning, James. Take it away.
Yeah, look, this broke just like maybe a half hour ago or so. This is a report coming from Russian state media, and so take it with as many salt shakers as you like. They are claiming that there were two drones that attempted to attack the president's residence inside the Kremlin. People are saying that there's been footage of smoke near the Kremlin or above the Kremlin or something like that. Russia claims this was a Ukrainian attempt to assassinate Vladimir Putin, and they are outraged. This is a terrorist act, and they reserve the right to respond in any way possible. Almost immediately, you had people raising the question of whether this was, I don't want to sound like Ron Paul here, but a false flag operation. I think it's very fair to ask, if you're Zelensky or you're the Ukrainian forces, would you like to kill Putin? Sure. Would you? But if you assassinate Putin in this way, does that make the Russian people say, okay, this Ukrainian war has been a disaster, let's stop? Or does it outrage them? Or does that make them say, how dare you attack, this symbol of the country? Screw you guys. We're going to go double our efforts, and we're going to, pound the hell out of Ukraine. Doesn't make a lot of strategic sense on that. But we have seen the Ukrainians attempt to strike targets in Russia in the past. So I suppose it's not unthinkable. Even if this was the Ukrainians, I'm almost certain the Ukrainians will come out and say, oh, no, wasn't us. This is, don't blame us.
Jim, the conspiracy theorists online have given false flag operations a bad name. Hitler actually started World War II with a false flag operation, killing prisoners, dressing them in Wehrmacht uniforms, and saying that the Poles had come across the border and killed them. A false flag operation so there are such things. We have no way of knowing. Do you think anyone in the media will slow down long enough and begin as you did? No one has any way of knowing because that's the responsible thing to do.
Sure, yeah. Well, okay, our mutual employer, the Washington Post, right in like paragraph 2 said there was no way to independently verify what Russian state media was saying. So I think so, and I hope so. Whether that actually affects people's thinking and their reaction to this and their thoughts about this, look, there are some people who either jump to conclusions or they don't get any exercise at all. And so that's, people who want to say, this is the Ukrainian. There's probably some people who'll be like, yeah, they almost got him. And they're probably going to be like, oh my God, Zelensky's such a reckless maniac. He's going to start World War III. This is why we should stop helping the Ukrainians.
Jim Garrity, Churchill said truth is so important it's got to be guarded by a bodyguard of lies. And all of us who've ever held an intelligence clearance knows that all sorts of stuff happens in this world. It's just a wilderness of mirrors. How in the world do the American people figure out what to believe in 2023 if they don't listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show or read Jim Garrity and Hugh Hewitt in the Washington Post or the National Review?
No, okay. I guess the first question is, how much do people care? I had written something last week, recognizing about how many culture war issues end up stepping into other realms. The argument about ESG and woke companies and everything you saw with the Bud Light thing, right? Economic issues can get put into a culture war narrative or paradigm, whichever phrase you want to use. The military, national security, right? The way to get people to talk about it is look how they're indoctrinating our soldiers, right? There's a huge appetite. You're in radio, I write for the web and for newspapers. We know that there is a chunk of the audience out there that loves a good culture war story. You and I on this podcast or on this show talked a bunch of times about the fear that China will invade Taiwan. I don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. It's entirely possible Xi Jinping doesn't know whether he's going to invade or not. But God forbid that day comes. The consequences are going to be global. The consequences are going to be severe. And I kind of wonder if people are going to say, we talked a lot about culture wars. We didn't talk nearly enough about potential wars and how that could be an issue and stuff like that. So there are times I get irritated with the news diet of the country as a whole, the news diet of both mainstream media and I think conservative media, since I think I both love these, stories. Social media, which is full of this, you won't believe what this person wrote on the receipt for the waitress, which like 9 times out of 10 is a hoax.
Our liberal friends will say, I want to make sure that we don't talk about WMD in Iraq enough. In the 1930s, they didn't talk about Hitler enough. And in 1913, they didn't talk about the Serbs. And I'm reading a book on 1913 in Serbia right now. And nobody knew what was cooking in Serbia in 1913. Jim, I don't know the answer. I give you the last 30 seconds. Please solve the problem.
What I try to do every couple of days is give people some of the vegetables and I give them some of the sweet stuff. And I'm hoping that the dessert. And I hope that diet means that you absorb the vegetables and you pay attention to things like Ukraine. You pay attention to things like China. You pay attention to, by the way, probably 2 years from now, there will be some other world crisis. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I wasn't writing about Chinese biological research before 2020. There's stuff that's going to happen that we're not going to be totally, only a small minority of Americans are paying the least bit of attention to that are probably going to be consequential to our lives. The only thing you can do is just try to stay ahead of the curve and not just get, absorbed into, what's the latest
Who the
thing
Jets didn't draft? Yeah, I didn't even bring up the Jets this weekend because I knew it would hurt too much. Jim Garrity, thank you, my friend. Come back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Mary Catherine Ham, I have a bone to pick with you. How are you?
Okay. I'm all right.
Yeah, I cannot get the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt's attention when she's listening to Getting Hammered. She shushes me. Shush. And I think, actually, there's nothing else out there that she will shush me over, but you and Vic Mattis, she shushes me over. So you and Vic Mattis are doing a heck of a job. How many times a week do you drop Getting Hammered?
It comes out 2 times a week, Wednesdays and Fridays.
Okay, I don't know when she listens to it. That's the annoying thing about podcast. Now, admittedly, I do that about my sports podcasts, and I say shh back at her, but nevertheless. So, Mary Catherine, did you watch any of the Judiciary Committee carnival yesterday?
Yes, I watched a bit of it, and I very much enjoyed Senator Kennedy's comment, which I'm sure you've played on the show about how his liberal colleagues should fill out a disclosure of their hurt feelings form.
Yeah, I haven't played that yet. It was full of great things, but it was also full of great points. Ted Cruz, something I'll play on the Grand Old Pod today, did a series of pictures, blow-ups of magazine covers that are just starkly racist attacks on Clarence Thomas. What do you think is going on here with this latest round of attacks, even on the George Mason Scalia School of Law?
I mean, I think that the first Clarence Thomas story about Harlan Crow, that they got traction with that. I think the Brett Kavanaugh stuff, when he was confirmed, maybe convinced them they shouldn't go quite that far in trying to delegitimize the court, but that this stuff might have some sway. And so the thing is, it feels very much like mainstream media coverage of the Russiagate stuff, which is just like, let's just bring a bunch of language together that sounds vaguely icky with not a ton of proof that anything actually happened and just give everyone a bad feeling. Ta-da!
And prepare for, pave the way for expanding the court. You know, that's what, break the filibuster, expand the court. What I find so deeply dishonest, Mary Catherine, is the court put out a statement on ethics, principles, and practices, which I will read in full on the Grand Old Pod today. It is very dense reading. It is 2.5 pages long. It's signed by every justice, and it says, we adopted a code in 1991. Occasionally, you know, we have to amend our forms, and no one can make us do anything. You can't, you know, it's unconstitutional to actually legislate a code. Dick Durbin didn't even mention it. He didn't mention the statement. He didn't mention the 1991 Code of Ethics. It's just all a lie.
No, this is the thing. I enjoy that the justices have these moments where they're like, oh, yeah, we're all standing together, because they don't want them to stand together, right? They want to break up this institution, and breaking up the justices themselves is one of the ways to do it. I'm also glad that Chief Justice understands separation of powers and can teach it to Senator Durbin. I guess he hasn't learned the lesson yet, but...
Well, you know, Mary Catherine, I'm a lot older than you. When I was at circuit court in 1983, it had it had Judge Bork, Judge Scalia, Judge Starr, Judge Ginsburg, all these liberals and conservatives, and they all like each other. They got along, and when Judge Rob, my judge, got sick, I worked for them all. It's just not the real world of the court. The court gets along. They do their best. They like each other. Why do the Democrats have to make us hate each other?
I think, you know, that's part of the objective, right, is to divide these folks. They hate it when Sotomayor, for instance, mentions at a law school that, by the way, Clarence Thomas is a really, really good person who's incredibly kind to clerks and support staff and anyone who works inside the court. They hate that influences her view of Clarence Thomas, because their view is that anyone who believes what we believe is de facto bad and evil. Like, I mean, that's actually what they think. Far too many people think. And I think the strength of those relationships is part of the strength of the court as an institution. And since every other institution we have wants to burn itself to the ground, especially media, apparently, their credibility, it's nice to have one that isn't intent on doing that.
Well, I think media organizations have become this way. I think media organizations are at each other's throats, and they've driven out the conservatives. But it's not that way. You know, I sit down occasionally next to Christopher Dodd at a luncheon that I am occasionally invited to. A group of guys get together, and I said, he's a wonderful guy. I enjoy chatting with him. Movie business. There isn't any of this in the water over the age of 30. But boy, newsrooms are different. I think newsrooms are just full of left-wing radicals who will drive out people. And maybe that's too sweeping. Correct me if it's too sweeping.
Look, I try to be fair to the media. I'm a fourth-generation print journalist. Presumably there will not be a fifth because there won't be any print.
There won't be, no.
But I love the media, and because I think its purpose is very important, but my relationship with the media is sort of like, help me help you. Like, I'm one of these people that you want to drive out, and I would like to give you the reasons that maybe considering the viewpoints of half of the country would make you better at doing your job. There's did you see the AP poll that came out this week that found that 6 in 10 Americans think that the media drives polarization and just makes things up? I mean,
of course it does. Only 6 out of 10? Where are the other 4 out of 10? Yeah, Maybe they're listening to Getting Hammered, like the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt. But boy, oh boy, you've complicated life for me twice a week. Getting Hammered available at iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you want a great podcast. Mary Catherine Ham, thank you. Don't go
Thank
anywhere.
you.
Follow her on Twitter at MK Hammer. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming back live inside the Beltway, joined by one of our favorite guests, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Good morning, Governor. Welcome back.
Hugh Hewitt, thanks for having me.
You know, you ghosted me on my text thing, and I thought it was after I brought up Andres Jimenez hitting 319. But then I figured out you've hired a staff. You must be getting very close because now they're hassling Danielle, and we're dealing with intermediaries. So you must have brought on some media people to screw up our line of communication.
Hugh, every once in a while, even someone like me needs a bodyguard,
I just think it's a clearest sign yet. I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to skip the horse race. I'm going to go to the what if. What if Chris Christie was president? What if you got in, you won the nomination, you beat Joe Biden? What would you do about the national debt? I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask everyone this because it's $31 trillion and we have to do something, Governor. What would you do?
There's no question, Hugh. Look, part of what I would do is informed by the experience I had as governor. And, when I got in 2010 in New Jersey, we had an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget. That is a 38% deficit that needed to be fixed because we had a constitutional requirement to fix it. And there's no great way to do this, Hugh. You've got to get in, dig in, and stop spending things. And prioritize what you must spend on, which for me, priority number one would be defense, because I think we're well behind where we need to be. And then you've got to look at the rest of what we're doing in government. And for God's sake, given what Donald Trump spent and what Joe Biden is spending, there are plenty of areas where we could go in and be able to pare back on what we're spending on. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it is grueling. And it's grinding work. I can remember sitting 3 days a week in the governor's office, going through the budget literally line by line. Not like they say in the debate, I'll go through the budget line by line. Literally going through it line by line. The kind of things you're going to need to do in this situation is to slowly but steadily reimpose fiscal discipline on the Congress, and that's not going to be an easy job. But I did it with a bunch of Democrats in New Jersey. And we did balance that budget without raising taxes. And I think the same thing needs to be done here in Washington.
Governor, the deficit is about $1 trillion a year or something like that. That's the immediate credit card problem. First thing you do is cut up your credit cards when you're deep in debt. And then the second thing is, how much do you owe? We owe $31 trillion. That's so much money that even if we get it down to $29 trillion, we're still going to have interest payments out the wazoo forever. Is there a sinking fund? That's what Pitt the Younger used when they had fought Napoleon forever. Is there some way that can be explained? The lockbox is nonsense. We've got to do something that works. Have you got an idea?
No, look, Hugh, there is no silver bullet to get ourselves out of $31 trillion in debt. The fact of the matter is we just have to slowly but surely take it down. And we're going to have to pay our bills. Unfortunately, the ones that we've run up. And that means there are going to be huge interest payments to make, Hugh. It's just the way it is. And I don't think there's a silver bullet way for us to get rid of significant amounts of trillions of dollars in debt. The best way to do it is twofold. One, not to add to it. And two, to be able to continue to have an economy that grows and that creates the type of opportunity for revenue for the government without tax increases that can slowly but surely bring that down.
Now, Governor, help me out. If I'm doing another debate this cycle, and we got a bunch of Republicans, and we'll come back to that in a second, how in the world do you frame a question that we can elicit from the candidate seriousness of purpose and detail on their plan for this? Because, it's like talking point heaven, but it never works. The $31 trillion has been done by Republicans and Democrats and Republicans.
It has, and I think, though, the way to frame it, you're pretty good at it, Hugh. You're a good lawyer, and you're framing it the right way. And I think it will. And this is part of about format for some of these debates. You've got to be able to follow up and to continue to push candidates like you do on your show. And that's the important way to go about this. And I think that for folks who are considering this, having dealt with budgets is an important part of knowing how to deal with it going forward. Also, knowing how to deal with a legislative body and be able to push them towards doing things they don't want to do is another part of it. And I have to tell you the truth. We haven't had a president who's known how to do that in quite some time. Donald Trump had no idea how to do it and couldn't do it. Joe Biden had no interest in doing it to the extent he even had an idea of how to do it. We need someone who's been a serious executive, not in the business world, someone who knows how to work the government to be able to be president.
I pull the lever mentally on anyone who says balanced budget amendment. I want them to disappear through the floor because that's not an answer to anything that won't get through. No. One of the things I do expect to hear from people is, well, over time, we're going to start with people who are 50 years old and younger. We're going to raise the retirement age by 1 month a year for the next 25 years. Is that reasonable, Governor?
I think it's reasonable to look at two things, Hugh. One is to look at raising retirement age, given the fact that folks are living so much longer than they were projected to when we started the Social Security system. Remember when Reagan went about trying to do some fixes back in the 80s? And secondly, I do think that we have to look at means testing. And I don't think that everyone who's paid into Social Security, if you're wealthy, should wind up having to pull out of Social Security. I think those are both things that we should take a look at. But that's something you're going to have to negotiate with the Congress, which will not be easy. But we can't any longer sit by and ignore the fact that there's a piece of good news. Everyone's living longer. But if you're living longer, we've got to look at whether people are working longer, too, and how we go about trying to change that.
Now, Governor, former President Trump is doing a town hall with CNN on May 10th. Caitlin Collins is doing it. She's a fine journalist. She will be fair. She will ask good questions. I hope they do a town hall with everyone. I hope they ask about the debt. But about the debates, I want a lot of them. I want them to start in August and keep going. The former president has indicated he doesn't want to do them. What is your position on this if you get in?
There should be as many as we can have. They should be as open format as they can be to allow for follow-ups and not allow people to give soundbitey answers that nobody believes will solve any problems. And anybody who's serious about wanting to be president of the United States should be on the stage for every one of them. And, look, what they say that the presidential campaigns are an X-ray of the soul for the people who are running. Well, those debates are an MRI because you can't, if the questions are good, pre-scripted answers are not always working. And it's a human interaction, Hugh, and you see how people respond on their feet. And that's very important for any executive because, the presidency is not a scripted exercise. And so that's why I think debates are important, and I think we should participate in them. And to the extent that President Trump doesn't want to participate in them, people should wonder why. And I think it's because he doesn't have a lot of serious answers for the problems that are facing the country right now. All he wants to do is go back and re-prosecute the 2020 election because his feelings are hurt. He's a child in that regard. And he
does have one good point, Governor. He's got like a 30, 40-point lead over everyone, Governor DeSantis in second place. And he says, why would someone this far ahead debate? And what's your response to that?
Because this is about letting the American people decide who's best prepared to be president. This is not running for student body president. And if he really cares about the country, and I have deep questions about that, but if he really cares about the country, then he's going to get up there, and he shouldn't be afraid. I'm sorry to see that Donald Trump feels like if he gets on the stage, he's at risk of losing his lead. If, in fact, his ideas are so great, if his leadership is so outstanding, then his lead will only increase if he gets on the stage, not decrease. But obviously he's afraid. He's afraid to get on the stage against people who are serious. And I'm sorry to see that he's that afraid of it. If he's not afraid of that, how can we count on him to do any better with President Xi than the failures he had in his first term with China? How can we expect him to do any better with Putin than having set the groundwork for the invasion of Ukraine, which his conduct towards Putin certainly helped to establish? This is a guy who seems like he's afraid. And if he's afraid, he has no business being president. Well,
no, I think Ronna McDaniel, David Bossie, and their colleagues at the RNC are doing a good job setting up an obstacle course of debates, and we'll find out what that is. My last question, Governor, I got 30 seconds. When are you going to decide by? When are you going to make this formal?
I will make a decision in the next 2 weeks.
Oh, that's why I've gone dark. I thought I ran over your dog. Will you text me if you say no?
By the way, the Jimenez thing didn't help either. Yeah.
Governor Chris Christie, always come back. Always a great interview. Thank you, Governor. Don't go anywhere, America. I got another one coming up. Larry Elder. These people who want to go up and do this thing, I think they're all out of their minds, but they're awfully good interviews. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Now, I am not neutral about great Larry Elder. I have known Larry Elder since 1990. When I was on KFI, he was the competition at KBC. When I went on to KCET television, he was a guest. And then he joined Salem. He was a colleague. Now he's lost his mind and is running for president. Good morning, Larry. How are you? Did he go away? What happened to Larry? He was there. And now he's gone. Or something happened to our broadcast booth. Oh, hey, Larry, are you there?
I'm here.
Nope. Oh, there is my friend. I just gave you the world's greatest intro, and you ghosted me there like Chris Christie on the text thing. Hey, Larry, how are you? Why are you doing this mad thing?
By the way, I'm looking at a picture right now of Chris Christie.
I know we've got a... You're not Chris Christie. We're going to try and make sure people know you're not Chris Christie.
Well, you have been called the black face. I've been called the black face of white supremacy, and now I see a picture of Chris Christie. So I don't know what's going on.
He was on at the top of the hour.
To answer your question, I'm doing this, as you pointed out, when you said you would never run. It's a massive sacrifice of time, of energy, of money, and I'm not flush like Donald Trump. I'm doing it, Hugh, because I feel I have an obligation. My father was a Marine, as you know, World War II. My older brother, Kirk, served in the Navy. He was a Vietnam-era vet. My little brother, Dennis, was in the Army. He actually went to Vietnam. I didn't serve, and I'm not proud of that. And I feel that I have an obligation to give back to my country that's been so great to my family and to me. I feel I have something to say. I feel I have something to offer, and I feel I'd be shirking my patriotic, my moral, and frankly, my religious responsibility if I didn't do this. And so I feel I have an obligation. I really don't feel like I have a choice.
So, Larry, let's start with the website, because I want to begin and end with the website. In order to qualify for the debates, you're going to have to get contributions in 50 states. I don't know what the level is. I don't know what the polling detail is, but I know that is going to be one of their metrics. So where do people help Larry Elder out?
They can go to elderforpresident.com, or they can go to my website, larryelder.com. And you're quite right. The first debate is in Milwaukee in August. They haven't really established what the criteria are yet, but it'll be a certain number of donors and a certain amount of money raised within a certain period of time. So I really need to raise a great deal of money. And unlike the gubernatorial race, the campaign finance limits are much smaller. You can give up to $3,300 for the primary, $3,300 for the general. And in the unlikely event, Hugh, that I'm not the nominee, you get back to $3,300 for the general. So a total of $6,600, I can get maximum contributions from people.
Now, Larry Elder, I want to start with the same question I asked Chris Christie to open the show, just to prove balance here. We have a national debt of $31 trillion, a $31 trillion debt. What would Larry Elder do about that?
Actually, the debt is even worse than that because that doesn't even take into consideration unfunded liabilities. The only way to stop the spending, because both parties do it, when Republicans want to do stuff called investments, they call it infrastructure or investments. When Democrats want to do it, we call it pork. Both sides do it. The only way to rein in spending is with an amendment to the Constitution that fixes spending to a certain percentage of the GDP, with exceptions for war and for natural disaster. Aside from that, we're never, ever going to rein in spending because you don't get votes by saying, I'm going to cut, I'm going to take away things. You get votes by saying, I'm going to give you things. Both parties do it.
Now, I told Governor Christie, if someone says that to me on the debate stage, I pull the lever and the door opens up underneath them, because we're never going to pass a constitutional amendment. It takes 2/3 of both houses and 2/3 and 3/4 of the states. What would you do on even if it got passed, it wouldn't apply to your first term. What would you do on day one?
Well, first of all, giving up on it the way you just now did doesn't help anything. The president has a big power. It's called the bully pulpit. I think most Americans are unaware of the fact that the three major entitlements programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are, quote, unsustainable. And that's not just my word. It's a word that Bill Clinton used. It's the word that Barack Obama used. That's roughly half of the national budget. Then you throw in defense and you throw in interest. You have a little sliver, so-called discretionary spending. So even cutting the so-called discretionary spending really won't get the job done. There isn't going to be the political will on either side to do what needs to be done unless you tie their hands, which is why you need an amendment. If it takes a few years to do it, so be it. But my job is to explain to the American people why this is necessary. So I wouldn't give up on the idea of an amendment to change the Constitution. The Constitution has been amended roughly every 10 years since the country has begun, so it can be done. You just have to marshal the will and the public opinion to put pressure on their politicians to do this.
Let's talk about that retirement age. You blew past 65, so did I. And Prager is indestructible. I think he's going to 100. It's got to go up, Larry. I mean, it's 65 right now. That doesn't make any sense. How high, how far, and whom should it apply to immediately?
Well, I don't really know exactly what the number should be, but when Bill Clinton put the commission together, he said you can do a couple of things. You can increase the rate of return regarding Social Security, or you can change the retirement age. And at some point, you're going to have to do maybe a combination of both of them. Look what's going on in France, for crying out loud. They want to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, and people are out in the streets. Once you take something away from people, they go nuts, which is why, one more time, you got to tie their hands politically so they can say to the American people, look, I'm sorry, I had to do this. I didn't want to, but by law, I had to do it. So that's the only way we're going to really get our hands around this problem.
Let's switch over to national security. I ask all the candidates this too. If Xi Jinping sends ships to invade Taiwan, would you have American submarines sink them?
This is a very complex question. People have to understand that China sees Taiwan very differently than the way we see Taiwan. They see Taiwan about as foreign as we think of New Jersey. Their law for 70 years has been to reunite that island, and so the way we see it is very different from the way they see it. Getting into a shooting war with the largest country in the world is something that we need to think about very carefully and very deeply. And I'm not prepared to give you a quick soundbite on what we ought to do right now. I'm a subscriber to the Powell Doctrine. Primarily, we need to have overwhelming force, and we have to have substantial buy-in from the American people. And I'm not sure we have either right now. So I think it's something that we have to think about very, very deeply before we get into a shooting war and before we say that Taiwan is a threat to the American people and it's in our best interest in order for us to stop that kind of aggression. I think we need to think it through very deeply.
What do you think would happen to the international economy if Xi did attack Taiwan? Leave us out of it. Let's say we're not doing anything. What do you think would happen to the world?
Well, if the response is that we're going to boycott China, we get a lot of our pharmaceuticals from China. We get our lithium that goes in our cell phones from China. Joe Biden wants this big push for EVs, which means that we're going to be more dependent on China for the so-called rare earth minerals that go into the batteries, the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel. Either China has it, mining it, or they're processing it, or they're controlling other countries that do. So again, China has very carefully and very skillfully made the world dependent upon its economy. And again, if we were to have this kind of boycott, it would throw the world into a deep recession, if not depression. We need to think that through.
So let me talk to you a little bit about Ukraine. Are we doing the right thing in Ukraine? Too much, too little? Nobody wants to send American troops there to fight. But what's the Larry Elder doctrine on Ukraine?
Well, the first thing is understand the original sin. The original sin, in my opinion, is the way Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. I believe had he not done what he did, it wouldn't have encouraged Putin to invade Ukraine further than he already had invaded them. That's the first thing. The second thing is I really think that it is our national interest in order for us to stop him from perhaps going into Ukraine and then maybe going and attacking a NATO country to then invoke Article 5. In many ways, Hugh, I believe that Russia has already lost this war. They've lost 200,000 people. If you put that in American terms, that's almost like us losing 400,000 people. We were very, very unhappy that we lost 5,000 people, Afghanistan and and Iraq combined. Imagine how the American people would react if we lost 400,000 people. So the Russian economy is reeling. He's had to disappear some 40 generals. I think he's in real serious trouble, and he's looking for an off ramp. And I think we ought to be able to put pressure on both sides to achieve some sort of settlement. But in many ways, Putin has already lost. I mean, we're in the second year of this war. We had American experts saying it'd be a matter of days, maybe a matter of weeks before Russia took over Ukraine, and this is now year 2 of this war. So Putin has already lost by many measures, and I think we ought to give him an off ramp because I think he's looking for one.
Does that mean more or less spending on Ukraine from the United States this year?
Well, yes, more spending, not just the United States, but also the other Western countries. We're doing the heavy lifting like we always are. We should put more pressure on the other countries for more buy-in. But again, I think it's in our best interest to stop this kind of aggression. I also think it will inform what China does, what North Korea does, and what the Ayatollahs do.
So, Larry Elder, let's do the debates now. Donald Trump is taking a page out of the Elder doctrine. He doesn't want to debate because he's so far ahead. You wouldn't debate when there was a recall underway because you were so far ahead. You got the recall. You won the recall. You wouldn't debate the other Republican. Is Donald Trump wrong to duck the debates?
You know, Hugh, I'd be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I were to tell Donald Trump he's wrong by ducking the debates when I didn't debate either, as you well know. I didn't feel it made any sense for us to get into what I call a circular firing squad because I knew that issue number one was to make sure the voters voted to remove Gavin Newsom. And in my humble opinion, if my fellow Republicans had done the same thing, had trained their firepower on Gavin Newsom, on what Gavin Newsom did regarding ignoring science on COVID, the way he shut down the schools, the crime, the fact that the average price of a home in California is 175% above the national average. If when my fellow Republicans were asked, what do you think about Elder? They said, it's not about Elder, it's about Gavin Newsom, then maybe you'd be talking to me from Sacramento.
So what do you think of Donald Trump bunking the debates? Because it is a circular firing squad.
I'm indifferent. I think that's a decision he should make. I know one thing, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be in Milwaukee. So whatever Donald Trump does, he does. I couldn't care less. I'm about talking about what the Biden-Harris administration has done to America on borders, on inflation, on gas prices, their opposition to school choice, the spending. This is what I want to talk about, and that's what I intend to talk about. And I think if we decide whoever the nominee is, whoever he or she is, we're going to unite behind that person to make sure that Biden Harris don't get another 4 years, then that, to me, is in the best interest of the party and in the best interest of the country.
Last question, Larry. Yesterday it was announced Nordstrom is closing their last 2 stores in downtown San Francisco. They're giving up. Why did that happen?
Well, you know why it happened. We have this soft on crime DAs, a soft on crime governor. We have voters were duped into passing Proposition 47 and 56 that lowered penalties for crimes. We have a bunch of crimes now that are considered to be nonviolent offenses, and that includes assault on a police officer, serial arson, rape of an intoxicated victim. I kid you not, Hugh. These are considered to be nonviolent offenses. When you lower the chances of a bad guy being caught, being convicted, being incarcerated, guess what? Crime goes up. They may be criminals, but they're not stupid.
Elderforpresident.com, is that right?
That's right, elderforpresident.com.
Larry, good to see you. Keep coming back, friend. Elderforpresident.com. 30 years I've known Larry. He's still on the top of his game. Thank you, Larry Elder. I'll be right back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt.